lane at all. So the 7 years seemed like a pretty comfortable place for people. They also expressed a lot of concern again about the waiver, that there should be conditions in there. They also expressed concern about an appeals process. If we say you can't have a waiver, do they have an appeals process? So we wanted to make sure that we built that in. There are also concerns that, where we're just going to sort of take money away from neighborhoods. And because I think it was a bit confusing for some neighborhoods because they thought what would happen at 7 years is we would just take their money away. And of course, that wasn't the intent. It was really to have them do a check-in, and especially if they needed to, if they hadn't done significant expenditures, to go out and check back with the community because it had been 7 years since plan approval, and we really wanted them to do that. We also talked about the robust community engagement section of the policy, which is more about laying out some expectations about what robust community engagement looks like. How do we know it when we see it? So it includes, a process for focus groups or surveys, and also they have to define a plan about how they're communicating with people. So I hope that helps answer that question.
Wonderful. Yeah, that's helpful to get that out. And I think for neighborhood associations too, they're concerned about this. I think, the goal is really take the money and put it to use in the community, do as much good as you can with it. And, this is about striking a reasonable balance in terms of making sure you have enough time to put it to good use and you're not just frivolously kind of throwing it at projects because there's some artificial timeline out there, but also that you're, engaging the community along the way and getting it out there and really being good stewards of this money and helping to advance your neighborhood's interests. So it's exciting to see this come together and all the engagement around it. And I appreciate all of your work and the work of NCEC and the neighborhood associations with their feedback and everyone else on this. So thank you.
Thank you.
I'll also note we've been joined by Councilmember Wright, who's not on the committee, but he's here, and he has a question or a comment on this item. Councilmember.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a comment. I represent the council on the NRP policy board, and so I'm just here to vouch that all the things that our presenter said are true. He really did do a nice round of work with not just the committee. The first thing that came out of our committee in terms of questions after we got all the background analysis were the questions that Councilmember Johnson was just articulating. Did you go out to the NC? Did you go out to the neighbor groups? Did you do a survey? Did you get the input? What did that look like? And how are you accommodating that? And so I think that whole back and forth was almost more important to the NRP policy board than the content question that got the whole thing animated in the first place. However, saying that, we do think we struck a good balance of having accountability, a transparent framework that also is very realistic in terms of what community groups can do and how they can respond to us, and also just having good factual background of how the program really has worked. And those analytics, I think, are so instructive and concise to that point. We found that as a very valuable tool, and I think it makes the purpose of this and why we're doing it in this particular way quite clear as well. So I appreciate that work, and I definitely appreciate the comments that Councilmember Johnson just said in terms of participation and its importance.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you being here and letting us know what the policy board had a chance to look at that. On that note, seeing no further comments, then I'm going to move forward the approval and also the staff direction. Any comments on the motion? Seeing none, then all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. That motion carries. Thank you very much for your time and all your work. And now I think we have better direction and guidance for our community moving forward, neighborhood organizations. And that brings us to our last item. This is the Green Zone Policy Work Group and Task Force. And we'll have a little presentation from Kelly Mulman from the Sustainability Office. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair, Council members. Good afternoon. My name is Kelly Mulman. I'm Sustainability Program Coordinator with the City of Minneapolis Sustainability Office. I'm pleased to present to you today on green zones related to the resolution that you have in front of you. So why am I here talking about creating a green zones policy for the city? Well, staff received direction from City Council under a couple different actions previously, starting with the 2013 Climate Action Plan. The Energy and Building section recommends developing a Green Zones initiative in Minneapolis. The 2014 Minneapolis Climate Action Plan 2-year priorities adopted in 2014, also highlights developing a green zone initiative as one of our priorities. And then in 2014, also, City Council adopted the Minneapolis Energy Pathways Study. The Green Zone Initiative is introduced in the report as a promising strategy to transition underserved and environmentally impaired parts of the city into healthier, safer, and more economically viable places to live and work. So what is a green zone? So we have done some research about green zones from across the country. We found multiple examples. There's no real consensus on what a definition for a green zone is. The spectrum varies widely from just focusing resources towards businesses to improve air quality and energy efficiency, all the way to very comprehensive, resource-intensive programs that look at things about housing quality improvement, energy efficiency, jobs training and placement, stormwater management through rain gardens, access to open space, and so forth. So what is a green zone in Minneapolis? What we really have to go off of, since there's no consensus on definition nationwide, is what has been provided to us in the Climate Action Plan and other documents that City Council has approved thus far. So within the Climate Action Plan, Green Zones is described as an initiative that will create a city designation for neighborhoods or clusters of neighborhoods that face cumulative impacts of environmental, social, political, and economic vulnerability. A green zone is an environmental and economic development tool that targets new green infrastructure and retrofits to an area in a comprehensive manner. Now, because this came out of the Climate Action Plan, it's very focused on the retrofit and energy piece, but we believe it may become broader than that through this policy development process. So what do we want to achieve? Ultimately, economic development, such as supporting new green, clean businesses, or providing assistance to existing businesses, such as through the Health Department's Green Business Program. Greenhouse gas emission reductions, as I mentioned, this came out of the Climate Action Plan initially, so that is one of the objectives for this policy. And then also equity. This is another vehicle by which we can look at our most impacted communities through an environmentally focused lens. What else do we want to achieve? We also want to designate those areas or zones. This is a green zones policy for implementation. So how will we achieve this? Through collaborating with city department staff. While sustainability will be facilitating the effort, it's really a number of different departments that we'll be working with, including CPED, Health, Public Works, NCR, et cetera, as well as community stakeholders, including businesses and residents. We'll engage them through the Green Zone Policy Task Force. So this is the resolution that's in front of you, is to develop this task force. Right now, it's composed of 9 community members, including residents and businesses, a mayoral representation, 2 representatives from city council offices appointed by the city council president, and 7 staff from those major departments that I mentioned, CPED, Health, NCR, Public Works, and Reg Services, as well as a person from our equity division in the coordinator's office. So what is the process? The resolution before you today to establish the Green Zone Policy Task Force will be working on what we're sort of calling a phase 1, and that is this timeline here on this slide. So first, it's establishing the task force. There'll also be a community engagement strategy for any additional community representatives that will be involved, engaging their feedback on this. And then the task force is being asked through this resolution to create a definition, a real vision and goal for what this green zone policy will do, as well as establish screening criteria and methodology for determining what areas of the city become green zones, selecting the programs and resources that green zones either have preference for or automatically are designated. And then all of those pieces come together into a policy that we'll bring back to City Council at the end of 2016. And I do want to point out here that there's been some questions about how green zone policy will address land use or zoning. And while the green zone policy as a citywide level may discuss how community gardens might be a land use that could be in the menu of options, any changes regarding land use or zoning happen through existing city processes such as small area plans and rezoning study. And that's where this phase 2 comes in. Once there's a citywide policy, a separate process beyond what we're talking about today will really be that neighborhood scale implementation, or more of the detail on if a community wants more industrial land or wants a community garden. That conversation will happen in that phase 2, because we need to create a citywide policy that's flexible enough to meet the different needs within these different areas. They're not going to have the same needs or desires. So today, again, before you is a resolution authored by council members Gordon, Cano, and Andrew Johnson, all here today, to establish a task force that will be charged with developing this citywide green zone policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that report. Are there any questions or comments, committee members? Councilmember Fry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple questions, and then I also will have an amendment, but I'll just, I guess, tackle the questions first. So this task force meets, they determine what the goals are, and then ultimately bring forward a list of suggestions that assumedly also have some sort of policy implications. Granted, any zoning change would need to go through our ZMP committee and determined separately. Do we anticipate that the task force will come forward with a recommendation that includes changes in zoning?
Not directly. And again, the task force...
I'm sorry, not what?
I'm sorry, Chair, Councilmember.
Yes. No,
I don't believe that it will... The policy itself will not make direct zoning recommendations. Okay. Again, all zoning recommendations would go through the established processes. Through small area plans and rezoning studies. Okay,
just for the record, I was just wondering I didn't hear the word directly. I wasn't asking for you to go through the specific procedure or anything. But it is, so you're saying it is possible though that one of the recommendations would be some form of zoning change?
An example, Chair, Council Member, the example that I can think of is that there might be a recommendation that the comprehensive plan update consider green zones recommendations or something like that. But I feel that any zoning recommendation would be so specific to an area that it doesn't seem appropriate for a citywide policy.
That makes sense. And so, but could you have a recommendation on a specific area as part of this task force?
The way that we're approaching this is that it'd be that would be part of phase 2, which is not what we're proposing as part of the citywide process.
Okay, and then let's hypothetically say that not hypothetically, this is in reality, that there are industrial uses that while they do supply a whole bunch of jobs, they're also emit some form of pollutant to the surrounding neighborhoods. I'm just trying to get a feel for what the plan of attack would be in those instances.
So maybe I could just interject here.
Sure.
This is the resolution is to create a task force to kind of study it and come up with the policies. So they're not, that would be way further down the road if we actually declared something a green zone and they were looking at what was going on and they decided we want a bike path here or we think we should do this here or that here, then they'd have to look at whatever it was. If something was declared a green zone, I think the intention is then there might be some resources for them to encourage more cleanup of what's going on already in their existing area. If that makes any sense. So that I suppose that the task force could come up with some policies and say our green zone policy can't cover these things or could cover those things. So your questions might even also be something that could be grappled with in the task force. I don't know if that makes any sense.
It does make sense. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'm just concerned you're going to get so far down the road that it's not being, I don't know. I think it's good that we have this discussion, though.
That makes sense. I'll yield to Councilmember
Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I didn't want to interrupt Councilmember Fry's questions, but, I did want to jump in here that it seems inevitable to me that a conversation about industrial land and industrial uses will touch land use and zoning. And so I had expressed concern to the chair and to staff that the makeup of the committee doesn't reflect anyone that has expertise in land use and zoning. And I've been convinced, I guess, although I still have reservations, that that has been set up with the expectation that this group of people will not be making detailed recommendations about land use and zoning. I am very cognizant of the fact that our staff, our limited staff in CPED, I don't really want to ask them to spend more staff time. This is already a really significant commitment of staff time from many different departments in the city. So, one option would have been to add folks from CPED, land use planning, or either our long range planning division or our zoning staff to this group. They don't really have the extra time. But I did want to raise that it does seem sort of inevitable to me that land use and zoning will come up. I do still have reservations about, raising the certainly this group will recommend whatever it wants to recommend, and we can take those recommendations as staff and policymakers to their next steps. But I did have some concern that that we don't have any zoning and planning staff represented on this group, and I think the way we've decided to all deal with that is that if there are any recommendations that come out of this related to zoning and planning, then we will engage the appropriate staff and policymakers at that time.
However, I just want to note that last week the authors decided we would create another seat. So if CPED Development Services Division doesn't have staff, I'll be disappointed, because the intention of creating that seat was to open it for somebody from Development Services Division, which would be planning and zoning staff. So we got that expertise. So
thank you, sir. I didn't notice that, but I think that's fine if they do have the time.
All right, thank you. And Councilmember Fry, did you have some more comments, questions, and an amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I'll just skip to the amendment. I hate to oversaturate an already relatively full board, but I do think that it's important that, I appreciate the addition of this representative from business with expertise in green manufacturing or environmentally friendly business practices on there. I think we should also have representation from specifically an industrial business. I guess I move to add a bullet point to the list of representatives so that it includes, quote, representative from industrial-based business located in Minneapolis.
Okay.
End quote.
We can let you sit down now because I guess we've plunged into taking action on it, but thank you so much for that report. Appreciate it. We'll call you back if we need you. Is there any discussion on that amendment? I'll just note that I think that's reasonable. Actually, the representation has gone through many different pictures, and earlier there was a more generic general business. In fact, I think it was even called out somebody that might have an environmental impact. Wasn't necessarily anything. So I think that'll be fine. And it will actually, I think, balance the number now evenly. It's getting to be a pretty large group, but I think it's still manageable. So I don't have any concerns with that. Any other discussion on it? Ms. Trammell?
Chair Gordon, I'm just going through the list and counting, and it seems to me if you make an amendment to add a representative in the manner suggested by Councilmember Fry, that you'll need to also make an amendment to change it from 19 individuals, because if my counting showed that would then be 20 individuals.
Good point. And then later will be some where it says 9 representatives from the community that will also have to say 10. So appreciate that. Good catch. I'm sure that's seen as a friendly amendment, Councilmember Fry.
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions or discussions or clarifications? Okay, then. On the amendment, we'll vote on the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That amendment passes then. Then we can have more discussion or more amendments on the full motion, which I think I'll just move then the resolution as amended, and then we can discuss it and amend it some more. Okay, that works. Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the addition at my request of this 2 representatives from organized labor. because again, our industrially zoned land provides a lot of really important jobs in our community. I was curious about the addition, which I hadn't noticed. I think you emailed, and I apologize, of the or groups representing low wage employees. I think that's fine, except for that I really intended this to be folks who represent workers in industrial jobs, and actually they generally aren't particularly low wage jobs. In fact, they tend to be pretty well paying jobs. And so I guess if the intention was to mean that it not necessarily have to be somebody from organized labor, but rather folks who represent those working in industrial jobs that are not, represented by a collective bargaining agreement or labor union, that would be fine. But I just wanted to make sure that this was clear that the intention was two representatives from organized labor or groups that represent industrial workers or however you would say that. I'm just not sure I would use the term low wage employees to describe this intention, unless the spirit is understood by everyone, and then maybe it's not that.
Well, we could refine that a little bit. Let's see. I think there's other comments. Councilmember Glidden?
Well, I see. Okay. I think we were talking about two different areas, because there's another section that talks about someone from an organization focused on low income and community of colors, environmental, and okay, I'm just reading it as it's stated, but I see there was another section. It says two representatives from organized labor or groups representing low wage employees. And I would just say, I guess there's an assumption that those are from industrial usages, but I don't know that this doesn't say that they would be from employees of industrial usages. So I think seems like a different thing, that if you wanted to add something that is different, and again, I guess you're growing. You can have everybody add it.
We could, although I think Councilmember Bender was maybe suggesting we just add a specification about where the labor or groups representing low wage employees are from. So it wouldn't be to add another seat, but just to clarify, we actually want somebody who maybe has worked with industrial. Now, I will point out that green zone, the land in a potential green zone, some of it will be could be very light industrial, could be commercial, could be retail. It's all sorts of different things that are going on in the green zone. So just to point that out, it could be a totally non-industrial area. We could say we would like to be a green zone. Nevertheless, the task force isn't from a green zone either. So if you have a suggested amendment, or Councilmember Johnson, did you?
Mr. Chair, I guess I was just asking, since that had been added, since I had sent the request, if there was a reason so was the reason that there would be different types of jobs in a potential green zone?
No, I think that got added because there was a concern that there might be some unrepresented workers. And I believe the language actually mirrors very closely what we did with the work group on working families, because we included organized labor or something, say a group like C-Tool that actually isn't a labor union and they don't have organized workers, but they're trying to represent workers. If that makes any sense. So that's where it came from.
Thank you, Mr. I appreciate that, and I think that is actually a helpful addition. I guess I would then move to amend the groups representing low-wage workers, striking low-wage workers, and instead saying groups representing industrial workers.
Okay. Which I could probably repeat it. So the bullet point that says two representatives from organized labor or groups representing low-wage employees would be changed. We would strike out, the amendment is to strike out the words low-wage employees and replace it with industrial workers. So it would read, two representatives from organized labor or groups representing industrial workers. And is there any discussion on that amendment? Seeing none, then, all those in favor of that amendment, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say no. Abstentions? That amendment carries then. And then on the main motion, are there any other comments, discussion, questions, amendments? Seeing none then, on the resolution, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries then unanimously, I think, from the committee. I appreciate that. Appreciate everybody's hard work on this. I know that this is also going to be taken up at the Community Development and Regulatory Services meeting. However, not their meeting tomorrow, but the next cycle, so that there's time to brief all the committee members, at least the chair. So, seeing no further business before us then, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.